Welcome to the Mobile UA Show. Today's episode is a part of our series Intelligent Artifice, a deep dive on how AI is transforming performance marketing. Since 2018 and over 250 plus episodes, we've been deconstructing how the best performance marketers actually win. Every week, I sit down with the operators shaping it, or we tear apart the ad systems behind the highest performing advertisers in the world. I'm Shamant Rao, founder of Rocketship HQ. Let's get into it. My guest today is Justin Gerrard. Justin has worked in growth and performance marketing leadership roles across companies like Twitch and Discord, and today advises early stage startups as a fractional CMO. I thought this would make for a great episode because while there is a lot of conversation about AI replacing work, there aren't as many conversations about what happens when truly experienced operators like Justin start using tools to really amplify their experience and to really turbocharge their work. In this episode, Justin talks about how he uses AI in his workflows, why autonomous systems are still a bit of a trap, especially when they come up against the deep experience of operators like Justin, how brands are scaling creative production with AI, and why having a human in the loop still matters more than ever before. I'm excited to welcome Justin Gerrard to Intelligent Artifice. Justin, welcome to the show.
It's awesome to be here, Shimon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. You came very highly recommended. And I'm also excited to have you because you've been on two very different sides of the picture that we're going to talk about. You've been in category defining companies like Twitch and Discord in-house, and now you're very much running solo, advising early stage startups, early to mid stage startups, right? So you've worked in a pre-AI world, managing large teams, and a post-AI world using AI instead of large teams. So take me back to some of the work you've done with Twitch and Discord.
Yeah.
To set some context, tell us how the teams were structured around you doing the same kind of work that you do now with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess first I'll start with Twitch. And I guess it's interesting because now I'm more in the fractional CMO side, which is a bit more encompassing, whereas some of the roles I was doing in the past were more kind of traditional growth, performance marketing oriented. At Twitch, when I was at the company, I was brought in to build out the performance marketing function. And the team never run paid ads. They wanted to stress test, hey, is this going to actually be a meaningful lever for the business? They'd always grown through organic channels, word of mouth, through their creator ecosystem, but now they wanted to try out paid ads. So initially it was just me setting up the buys with an agency. Then I ultimately brought on a team, about 4 media buyers across paid social, retargeting, programmatic, across mobile and web, all the own channels. We had another agency helping us do creative at scale. We had a data science team supporting us with analytics, as well as a team working on kind of fine tuning our LTV model. And then ultimately a PMM team to support on larger campaigns. And I reported into the head of growth and media, who reported into the CMO. So like a pretty traditional structure in terms of what I'd seen in growth teams. At Discord, I was brought in via an acquisition of a startup where I was leading marketing. It's called Backyard. It was basically embedding live gaming experiences into a video chat. I would say we had pandemic market fit, maybe not product market fit, but pandemic market fit. And it did really well during that time. But when the company was acquired by Discord, I was brought in to do ASO, run their ASO and optimizations there in the app and Play Store, as well as creative ad optimization. Similarly structured, I was reporting into kind of head of growth. It was a team of 4, mix of media buyers, and then me on the ASO creative strategy side, reported to the CMO. Differently, we did all of our kind of analytics in-house, and we leaned on an internal creative team to make all of our assets as opposed to an agency. I guess what's different now, as I think about where I am on the GTM side and being an embedded CMO, it's hard to directly correlate my experience, right? One's like kind of solopreneur, one's a larger team. But what I'm doing now, when I think about measuring campaign performance, when I think about pulling out insights and new creative ideas and hooks and ways to differently position the brand, putting together any type of new content, that used to take weeks of kind of back and forth and making sure that all the teams were aligned and bringing in the designers and making tweaks, et cetera. And a lot of that work now relative to tools that exist through these AI platforms can be done in a few hours, right? As opposed to a few weeks, particularly on kind of data analysis, research, fine-tuning new concepts piece. And what that's unlocked is a tremendous amount of productivity and speed that didn't exist before. And it seems like that's the new paradigm that we're in within this context, whether you're working for yourself like me or even new teams and setups, I imagine, in existing mature enterprises.
Yeah. And do you notice that mature enterprises have been able to make the shift to this new way of working very easily?
What I found, most of the companies that I'm working with now, again, are earlier stage, but I'm obviously tapped into my friends who are at larger companies. I don't think there's one model that companies are using. I think some companies, they're like, hey, we're really leaning into this AI thing. Everybody's going to be making skills, and we're going to have these markdown files of all the marketing elements, and everyone's going to be using that. And others are like, let's use it to speed up the process of creating certain assets, but it hasn't bled throughout the entire org. So I think it really depends on the leadership, how quickly they've wanted to adapt to the tools.
Yeah. And that's also been my experience from the conversations I've had, that in larger organizations, there's much more variance in terms of how much adoption there has been. And even there's been variance in terms of how they define AI adoption just as well. But with the smaller companies, as you just pointed out, where you're working pretty much solo, you're able to have disproportionate impact, which is crazy compared to what was just possible even just a few years ago.
Absolutely. I would not be able to do the type of work that I'm doing now without access to these tools. And it's not to say I'm just able to speed through everything. It's just the initial either 60% or the work and research elements and data analysis that would have to be before. It's just almost instantaneous. So that much, all the other elements of the work you can focus that much more on the strategic work. And I think that is what's really impactful.
Yeah. In preparation for this call, when we spoke, you said Claude has become not a tool, but an operating system. Talk to me about what that means, and specifically how that manifests in how your typical Monday morning looks from the moment you open your laptop.
Yeah. So when I am able to open my laptop, it's definitely right after dropping the kids off. So the kid craziness always happens first. But yeah, it really is an operating system. So, I work very heavily in Claude Desktop. I am not technical, so you're not going to see me really in the terminal doing a bunch of fancy stuff yet. Hopefully, maybe down the line I'll get there. I know in our last conversation you talked about you're really Claude pilled and maybe doing some deeper work. But I found that kind of working in those folders that have the deep context on all the different companies that I'm working with are incredibly helpful to keep me organized and focused on where I can make an impact. When I open up my laptop, I'm immediately going into Claude. I am looking at the meetings for the week and deliverables. I have MCP connectors for my note-taking app, as well as kind of Google Drive and the different docs that I use to curate GTMs and all of my notes. I'm feeding that directly into Notion. This kind of gives me a list of to-dos. I'm using Claude to go back and forth, understand my understanding of the key insights, make sure that I've kind of stress test that I truly know what the kind of key priorities are to work on there. And in addition to the strategy work, I'm also helping with a fair amount of hands-on execution for some of the startups. So that can include putting together a lifecycle drip campaign for a new product release, or updating positioning and messaging docs, doing an overview of creative assets. And where I found Claude really helpful is, hey, here's all the context. Help me get to about 60, 70% on the actual documents themselves. And then I can do the fine tuning that last 20, 30%. And what this has really done is ultimately, at the end of the day, you get the output from these tools, and then you have to use your wisdom and experience to say, will this actually resonate with customers? Does this make sense? Maybe the formatting, maybe the value proposition is in there, but it's not quite right. It's that little bit of dissonance. Even that being said, like relative to that, the value per hour that I can provide is much higher, because I'm like starting the day with these tools, has all the context, helps me get to 60, 70%, and then I can push it forward. And so again, allows me to do more of the strategic work, but also be way more hands-on and helpful with the execution piece as well if I need to step in there.
That definitely resonates, because I've had a number of conversations, and one through line I've noticed is that a lot of very experienced practitioners don't let AI do 100% of the work. In fact, in my book, if you let AI do 100% of the work, that is a red flag. Maybe for very simple tasks, you could allow that to happen. In fact, when we hired, we just went through a bunch of hiring, and a very immediate disqualification was that when it was very clear that someone's used AI over 95% with very little editing. I can see, and I think what's also underappreciated is that it's not easy to step back and have that critical pushback layer where you're using your own inputs and insights on top of the 60-70% that the AI has provided.
Yep.
That's not easy, so good on you. And just to double click on some of that, could you pick an example of a GTM plan you built or a project you worked on for any startup that you worked with? Walk me through the exact plan you built. You don't have to share specifics if you're not comfortable, but walk me through the plan. What were the first inputs you fed in? What were some of the early outputs the model gave back? And what was the point when you're like, okay, this is about as far as the model's going to take me. This is where I'm going to take over.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is like the key piece in anyone who's doing that strategic layer work, particularly putting together the GTM plans, like having a thoughtful process about that. So one of the startups that I'm working with right now, they are doing a localized launch in one of their, relaunch in one of their core markets to try to drive increased user density. And I was basically putting together a GTM plan that combined online and offline elements to help make this successful. And so in terms of working directly with Claude's skills are amazing in terms of helping to set up like the formatting for these type of plans. So within any kind of GTM plan, you have core messaging, positioning, demographics, audience sizing, key KPIs, sequencing risks and like outcomes that you want to drive. And the way that this data is presented, particularly when I'm working directly with startups where I'm presenting what the plan should look like, the formatting around this and clarity of message is really important. So I think that like the tool, Claude is really good at helping me develop this GTM skill where I'm putting in these inputs and it's giving me that first initial formatting. Hey, here are all the things that we need to think about within the context of building out this plan. And we can get that first draft of the doc out. And this took a lot of time in the past doing all this work. It's nice to have that. Where my brain takes over next is actually in the thinking through the tactics that will work or kind of the channels and different approaches on the strategy based on what I've seen in the past. So for this particular GTM, I knew an out-of-home component would probably be important and helpful relative to providing that kind of awareness consideration layers where then doing things that are more down funnel, as well as working with local press and influencers as that layer, that on the ground piece, and establishing a formal Campus Ambassador program. I also knew that before doing the on the ground work, we could use a digital layer to do seeding through social, through UGC content, where we're able to put out a bunch of different concepts to do the initial messaging and positioning work before we're actually on the ground to make sure that when we are there, it's landing in the right way. And before we kind of like step on the ground to do the IRL component. Where I brought Claude back in was helping with the research and kind of competitor analysis piece. What local groups should we be working with? Who might we want to partner with? Pulling the initial list of potential influencers, getting a sense of the competitors that are in market and who have launched in the past. And so this kind of gave me, I put in the initial insights, I got that output, I layered it in with the competitor research data, and then it's cleaning up my version of those plans so that it kind of all formats and looks nicely. And then after that, I got to put my brain back on again, which is, okay, these are all the inputs, this is what I inputted in, this is the final doc. This all still makes sense, right? Adding that keen eye to each of the different components. And it may have also added some things in that you just want to catch that may not make sense. So essentially what it's done is supercharge the creation of the doc, which again, can take a lot of time. That time I can then spend on more strategic work. And then on the competitor analysis to make sure that I'm bringing kind of like the most successful tactics to the market. But after that, I would say you're almost constantly keeping your brain on throughout the process because you can get so enamored with how quickly these tools can work that ultimately the output has to result in impact for a company. So those two things have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And a couple of things you said really resonated. Number one was you actually go back and forth. It's not a linear process. It's not like Claude hands it over to you and you perfect it, right? You're still going back and forth. And the areas where you're intervening the most is where you're basically saying, this doesn't really make sense, or this you said the outdoor advertising makes a lot of sense, but Claude with its understanding just doesn't know that. But you, with your pattern recognition across the real world, across real world companies, you do know that. And so you're able to intervene and do something that's better than the average of the internet that Claude is providing.
That's 100%. That's actually one of the best ways of crystallizing that thought that I've heard. You're able to do better than the average of the internet, right? That's ultimately, if there's arbitrage, that's where the arbitrage exists. That's where the human in the loop piece still exists, which is based on that wisdom, based on not wanting to do the median of what everyone else is doing, but also having an appreciation of what that is to help. So initial context is super important.
Yeah. And I would also argue that for a lot of early stage startups and high tech startups, you cannot have the median of the internet knowledge impact your strategy, because the median of the internet probably doesn't know about high tech, probably doesn't know about the leading edge of marketing and growth and everything. I would argue some of the models have gotten more sophisticated. They are much more knowledgeable than, say, a year ago, but I don't think they match the domain knowledge of someone like you that has spent a decade in the trenches. I don't think we are yet there. Go ahead.
Yeah, always doing the math of like, all right, you're doing some of the pattern matching, but then you're like, well, and when I've done this in the past for this similar company, like this is what I also ran into as a challenge. So based on where this company is and their budgets, this may not work, right?
Yeah.
So you're constantly pulling in all that. And I know this is exactly on top of maybe kind of interesting, which is around like how, if you think about even more junior operators, if they're doing GTM or they're helping with this, where they're basically just operating off of, hey, what am I able to pull from doing some Perplexity research or ChatGPT or whatever, and it's okay, this seems to have worked for this startup. Well, there are a lot of nuances in a lot of those GTM plans that aren't necessarily talked about in the TechCrunch articles and in the Reddit threads, et cetera, and make it seem like everything was unicorns and rainbows when it happened. But you may do that same exact tactic and miss a lot of the actual challenges that occur. And so that makes me very curious to see how that's navigated in the future for people who are over relying on some of these tools.
Yeah, and I think you can already see that it's easy to spot people who are over relying on these tools. I think it's becoming easier to spot, at least for somebody that's experienced. I think you can catch some of this easily.
Yep.
Just to switch gears a bit, I know you worked a lot on performance marketing teams, on creative strategy in particular, and that's an area that's been changed quite dramatically by AI. And I know we were chatting in preparation for this call about how it's relatively easy to produce 1,000+ pieces of automated UGC on a monthly basis. Talk to me about how a brand might be able to do that if that's what they need to do.
Sure. So I think there's two ways of doing that, right? Just take a step back. The reason why companies are doing this is because everyone has access to software now. So really moat is within the context of distribution and how quickly you can get content out there. And then also, can you cut through the noise? And so I think there's like kind of two ways to go about it. One, if you are enterprising enough and have some maybe creative background and technical background, you can use Claude and pull in some of these image and video generation models to create some of your own content at scale, pulling in your brand guidelines and documents and doing all that work and then posting out to your own channels. You can do that. What I found is that if you don't necessarily have experience, that can be tough to build on your own, although you can do it. So what I've seen more companies do is they work with partners to do this that essentially can help you create content at scale. And one of the ones that I'm aware of will allow you to create 1,000 TikTok kind of carousel posts a month. So think about 250 a week where it's ingesting in that content. It's pulling in hooks based on competitors that it's scraped, like Meta Ads Library or other content that's out there, helps you post all these formats into a queue of approved content. And then you can parse through that, select what you want to go live, and then post it across actual accounts. It's pretty fascinating that you have access to that. I think the one piece that's, you should definitely be testing all these tools, right? I come from a growth background, so do you. Hey, try everything, see what works for you within reason. But I think you also have to know what it will drive relative to the results that you're trying to get after. So some of these platforms are great. You're getting 500 to 1,000 views per post, which if you're doing 1,000 per month, that's 500,000 to 1 million views per month. That's awesome. But is it actually driving? What is it actually driving, right? Is it just good to screenshot and to throw up into your fundraising and pitch decks and show to the VCs who are funding the company? Or is it actually driving down funnel results, right? Is it driving installs and then that's leading to registrations as opposed to just views and installs, et cetera? So I think it's really important as you're using these tools that are incredibly powerful, that are incredibly productive, that you're actually measuring kind of the down funnel impact. That's where I see some companies miss when they're turning some of these systems on.
Yeah. And I also notice And I would be curious to hear your perspective on this. I also noticed that a lot of companies try to make these tools autonomous. And in my experience, that's a trap.
Huge trap. Huge trap.
Yeah.
I
Talk
agree.
to me about what you're seeing.
I just feel, again, to the earlier point, if you're turning on these systems, even if they're as finely tuned on content that's working, et cetera, and competitors out there, if you just let it run on its own, that the output, at least from what I've seen, has never been quite at the level that's actually going to drive consumers to take an action. A lot of times when I see that volume, when you see the pieces of content, particularly in terms of UGC that perform well, there is an emotional resonance that's there, so clear in the content that pulls the potential customer user in, that a lot of times this AI content can't quite do if you're automating it. Now, it can get you 70, 80%. I think there's a bit more on that curation piece that's required. And again, I'm not trying to say that it won't exist, but right now, as it stands, the companies just turn it on and let it go. They're like, hey, I'm creating all this content, but it's not driving any results. And I think that's why. It's because the full automation piece isn't quite there yet.
Yeah. And in many cases, some of the people I see don't even know what's in the content, what's in the video. And that's a scary place to be because they have no idea why it's not working.
Yeah. And brand safety or anything else, right? Like these.
Yes.
Like you put out content out there. I was working with a client that had some performance media that was working really well and was digging into it. I was like, hey, this asset is working well, but it has 18 curses in this content. So is that actually what you want to optimize for? They're like, oh my God, we didn't even realize that. It was just kind of going well and we turned this tool on.
Indeed. To switch gears and talk about something else that stuck out to me from our last conversation was you said that in the last year or so, when you worked with AI to build GTM plans, AI has not given you a single genuinely net new idea. And that observation really stuck with me. Talk to me about what you meant and what specifically your experience has been.
Yeah. So I think maybe an analogy that could be helpful here is that AI to me is a really fast librarian, but it's not an author. Like it has read every piece of text that's ever existed. It's able to get to an insight extremely quickly, which is very valuable, but it doesn't necessarily help you find the next insight that exists. Like the librarian isn't writing the next book. And so if you're using Claude to help you with the GTM plan and it's helping you to come up with a bunch of ideas based on things that have done in the past, that's helpful, but it doesn't necessarily have the context on specific cultural moments or untapped audience behavior or something that's emerging based off of new trends, like the new brand that's coming, for example. So I think the undocumented insights are really where human operators still have the leverage, particularly in the creative space. And in terms of where we are right now, and again, these models are moving so fast that I can't have the hubris to say that this won't change in a year or whatever. What I'm seeing right now is that they just don't have, it's more like a better search than genuine invention. But I still think it's incredibly valuable. It's just like knowing that difference, I think is important when you're trying to actually move the needle on these campaigns.
Yeah, certainly. Right. It's like a very smart research assistant, very valuable, not quite an inventor. Yeah, we'll talk about this. Maybe when AGI comes, we'll
have to do another pod when that happens and be like, hey, Justin, now
let's talk tomorrow.
Now what do you say?
Let's talk tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. All right, let's do it.
Tomorrow, right? 24 hours. Then we'll have a different
24 hours. Yeah. And you also mentioned that the big differentiator with AI assisted work isn't the model, it's the humans in the loop, which you also mentioned earlier on this conversation. Can you share an example where that last 20, 30% mattered the most and where the human in the loop was the big differentiator?
Yeah, it sounds trite. Everybody makes this whole kind of taste argument. Hey, taste is kind of the last. I do still kind of agree with it, even though it's kind of, everybody talks about it ad nauseum. I do kind of agree with that piece. So I was working with an ed tech company to help them refine their paid ad strategy. I helped them source a really excellent performance marketer, came in fractionally to support. And the challenge was that we just didn't have kind of the creative execution at scale. They had a designer who could put some stuff together, but we weren't able to get the type of volume that was required to do all the testing and bring in different concepts. And so we brought in one of those companies, I won't name the exact platform, but a platform where you could create tremendous volumes of AI generated content at a relatively low cost. Interestingly enough, though, this team also had some humans who would help to kind of smooth the edges on the last mile. And the ultimate output wasn't actually bad. The ideas were clean. The hooks made sense. There was clearly thought. And the visuals generally made sense. But The key piece that was missing was the humans in the final execution. So as much as some companies try to say now to defend, hey, consumers can't necessarily tell when it's AI, I just found that's not quite there. You approach everything about the content looking except for that last piece that had the actual kind of human selling the content. And when you're working with an education company, that actual tie-in with the person who's using the product, that human component is really important at selling in products in particular that require a bit more understanding of how it works, and where it's not like the value proposition is really immediate. It's not like using AI tutoring tool or something like that, where you just do a TikTok and then you're right into the product and then can use it. So that was kind of the component. Like the ideas were great, but then the fact that we didn't have, for this particular type of content, humans in there, if you would just let the campaign run, it would not have performed well. When we actually did A/B test it, we said, hey, let's take these concepts with AI creators, take these concepts with actual human creators and see what works better. And we actually weren't getting any conversions with the AI creators. So I think that's the piece where it's like recognizing a good idea, recognizing good formats, et cetera, but understanding, having the user empathy based on running a bunch of campaigns to say, what is actually going to move them to that next step of their customer journey and conversion.
Yeah, interesting. Yes. Human in the loop is what makes such a huge difference. And I'm also realizing that after being very enamored with going all in on AI for a long time, and I mean, I love AI. I'm just starting to realize how critical the human in the loop is, and also how hard it is to take that step back and use your own judgment and critical insights, because it's just so easy to let the model run wild. Justin, we could go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, just maybe as a closing point, like you have to sometimes snap yourself out of it.
Yeah.
Of how performing these things are, because they can make you super productive, but they can also make you lose the human magic.
Yes.
But I have to like work really hard as these models continue to get better to snap myself out of it and say, there's a little itching feeling in the back of my mind. Is this kind of, okay, it actually doesn't. And I'm glad I'm able to still catch that. If I'm just entirely willing to do everything, I'm going to lose that. And that's losing the secret sauce that I built up.
Yeah. I was chatting with somebody that this is the first time creating something gives you the dopamine rush, because traditionally dopamine rushes are when you do mindless things, when you just waste your time. And now you can actually do something useful, something very creative, and there is the dopamine rush. That is a wonderful thing, but it's also something to be very careful about. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say and echo as well.
Absolutely.
Justin, I know we are coming close to time and we could keep going, but I want to be respectful of your schedule. This is perhaps a good place for us to start to wrap up. But before we do that, can you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do?
Absolutely. Check out my website. It's just justinrgerrard.com. Has some background on how I support startups. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm posting a few times a week. So if any of this is kind of interesting, all my musings are on there. And you can also DM me on there as well if you'd love to chat or connect with anything that was discussed on this podcast.
Excellent. We will link to all of that in the show notes. And for right now, we will let you carry on with your day. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a guest on Intelligent Artifice.
Yes, thank you. It was a lot of fun.